good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, to those who are participating in this webinar. So what is citizen science? Just briefly, I know that most likely everybody knows it's scientific work undertaken by members of the general public. And it's usually people who are who have other professions. And so my presentation is about the youth. So they are the pre-college student community, as well as community members in towns and villages. So there is a citizen science program spectrum where the question, the methods design, data collection, data analysis, and use of findings are driven by either the researcher or the citizens or individuals or community members that are participating. So left hand of the spectrum are individuals who are data collectors, and on the right side of the spectrum where the individuals or community members are the scientists driving the program or the problem solving that they're interested in. So there are three programs that I'm going to present. It's about the GLOBE program, Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment, the Arctic and Earth STEM integration of GLOBE and NASA. So from local observations to including to a regional and global because of the satellite data that NASA provides. And then the Winterberry project, which also uses the GLOBE program, but also has its own phenology protocols. So the focus of GLOBE research is to understand the interaction of the different parts of the Earth system. GLOBE examines all parts of the Earth system, the atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, and pedosphere, or soils. We should not we should remember that we humans are part of the biosphere. So the GLOBE measurement protocols provide the tools students need to investigate and monitor the changes that are taking place in our dynamic planet. And here are the basic measurement protocols used for ongoing science investigations. So right now there's 124 countries involved, 780,000, more than 780,000 GLOBE students in 33,000 schools worldwide. And thus far, 150 million measurements have been submitted to the database. Now, the GLOBE program has extended its reach to for other individuals, not just in the K-12 or the pre-college student community, but also to anybody in the community. And so they have a GLOBE Observer app on the phone, and you can now observe clouds, mosquito habitat map habitats, as well as land cover and trees. So examples of phenological investigations that students have done. So they have gone not just collecting data, but also conducting investigations for their own needs. And so they can do in phenology, which is the study of response of organisms to seasonal and climate changes in the environment. So the green up when the leaves, when the buds burst, and then at the end of the plant growing season when they green down or the trees start senescing and the leaves start turning color. And the GLOBE program has also provided learning activities to help students learn the scientific concepts in the measurement protocols. And then there's looking at the data from the local, and here's an example of data from Shagaluk in Inoko River School in Shagaluk, Alaska, as well as an example of data from Japan, where it shows the green up graph on the left side, and then the green down of this particular species. And if the students also collect atmospheric data, moisture and temperature, then it can also, the minimum and the maximum temperature, it can also be seen at the lower part of the graph. And so for student outcomes, they do phenological studies and collaborative studies, where an example of Matsu career and technical high school students helping U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in trying to determine when is the best time to do a survey on eagle nests. And we also have scientific publications as students' data contributing to scientific publications. So in the citizen science program design, so where we can see on the left side, the contributory, and then on the right side, the co-created efforts in citizen science or community science. So in designing for outcomes across scales, we've come up with a hybrid model where both outcomes are being sought are actually being met, where there is the theoretical or generalizable needs, as well as the local community needs. And so we have community investigations. And in this Arctic and Earth Science program, we have teams of scientists and elders come as part of the training professional development workshop. But we have teams of students, educators, formal and informal, community members, as well as youth leaders come in to the training workshops. And so we have designed learning framework for generational and cultural diversity, so that we have a culturally responsive learning framework where they start with working with elders, local experts, and scientists in talking about their own interests and what they want to address in their community related to climate change. So it's students doing science, learning science by doing science, as well as taking some action on what they're learning. And so as part of their learning framework, they not only explore, experiment, explain, and apply, but they also, they apply what they have learned to a problem in the community. And so it contributes to social ecological resilience, data collection using the GLOBE protocols, and then doing a stewardship project. And here's one where in Kwethluk, Alaska, students were interested in an erosion problem in their community. And so they used the GLOBE measurements as well as measuring the rate of erosion, land loss in their community. And to them, it was not just the loss of land, but they think of loss of land as loss of heritage. And so they actually went to their after their study, they actually went to their town hall, city officials, and recommended that a certain type of anchoring boats which doesn't contribute to erosion, as well as planting more vegetation along the river, because they have noticed that there's less erosion where there's more vegetation, and asking for a no-wake zone on the river close to the village. And so with program, we also have program evaluations, and so knowledge has increased, contact knowledge has increased about local climate change issues, knowledge of how to braid and weave Alaska Native knowledge with Western science, and confidence in designing an inquiry project or an investigation, and knowledge of teachers, educators, in how to guide youth in investigating and addressing a climate change issue. And so on the Winterberry project, it's designing for outcomes across scales, needs, and priorities alignment. So for example, The ecological research question is, how do shifts in climate affect the fate of ripe berries and timing of berry loss from plants in fall and winter across Alaska? The local question is, because everybody's interested about berries, why are our berries changing in this time of climate change and environment? And the citizen science research question is, can this contributory model of citizen science be supplemented to increase diversity of participation and also to increase social ecological outcomes? And so, so there's three basic, this Winterberry or Arctic harvest study design. The basic, where they could, the participants, whether it's individual students or individual adults who want to participate in this Winterberry project, where they can get their information on the website. And then there's a highly supported, where scientists and a mentor would go to a classroom or to this after school student group. And then also another highly supported, but includes storytelling as a way of increasing the interest and participation. And so, so this is the design for diverse learners, storytelling-based citizen science learning, where they start with engaging, exploring, explaining, and applying, and sharing, but using storytelling all at the different steps of the way. And they share, they think back on, you know, again, working about what their family might have been doing in terms of berry picking and what it means for them. And berries are part of subsistence foods for the native, Alaska Native people. And even for non-native, it's still a very important part, since we are here in Alaska, where fresh fruits and vegetables are expensive. And so in measuring resilience-related outcomes across scales, this shows the framework where there's the citizen science participation, and then the individual learning outcomes, as well as programmatic outcomes of local berry phenology data set and regional model, and then the community outcomes of adaptive capacity. And so, again, just showing the citizen science program design, where the whole spectrum goes from where it's the researcher-led to community-led investigations. And I would just like to thank my collaborators on the different programs, the Alaska Globe, the Winterberry, and the Arctic and Earth Science. And I thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Lena. I don't see any questions online yet. Do any folks in the room have questions for Elena before we move to the next speaker? All right, and I think we're ready to move on. Our next speaker is Marilyn Sigman. Marilyn is University of Alaska Fairbanks, Alaska Sea Grants Marine Education Specialist and an Associate Professor in the UAF College of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences. She is also the editor of a Best Practices Handbook for Community-Based Monitoring of Alaska's Coastal and Ocean Environment. Today, Marilyn will be talking about Alaska CoastWatch project and using citizen science to engage Alaskan youth in strengthening community resilience. Welcome, Marilyn Sigman.
Morning. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about Alaska Sea Grant and our involvement in community science. We focus primarily on ocean and coastal environments and coastal communities in our work. We do our work through both research extension work, and education. I'm getting an echo. Are we okay? All right, I'll continue. And in the research that we fund, we require community involvement and benefits to Alaska communities. Several of these research projects involve community volunteers. The examples you see here are a Stakes for Stakeholders coastal erosion monitoring project that's in 10 Bristol Bay communities and a similar one that's in Utqiagvik. In addition, we have 7 marine advisory extension agents in coastal communities that stretch from Ketchikan to Nome and out to Unalaska. They participate in and are often leaders in community science projects along that spectrum that Elena described to you. The examples you see here are PSP monitoring and the NOAA Plate Watch project to detect marine invasive species. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. So we became aware of the importance of youth involvement in citizen science, or more broadly, community-based monitoring, from the perspective of Alaska coastal communities in a series of workshops. The first one came about when we could see that community-based monitoring was expanding dramatically in Alaska in a lot of different ways about 7 or 8 years ago. Alaskans were and still are collecting all sorts of local environmental data, from the school children collecting globe data to hunters collecting biosamples from harvested marine mammals, to water quality monitoring and collection of shellfish for PSP monitoring. People were also walking beaches and collecting and counting up marine debris. So we partnered up with the Alaska Ocean Observing System and several other organizations to convene a statewide workshop of the practitioners in community-based monitoring, both the scientists and the community members, so they could share their successes and also their lessons learned, and discuss how to collect scientifically valid data and also sustain participation by community members. The outcome was this handbook of best practices that you just heard about. But one of the messages that we heard very loud and clear from the community participants was their desire to have youth involved in these projects. So youth engagement emerged as a best practice for community-based monitoring, particularly for remote, small, rural communities in Alaska that face major challenges from climate change. A couple years later, we hosted with a whole variety of partners again, a series of coastal resilience adaptation workshops in 4 regional hub communities in western and northern Alaska, northwestern Alaska. And the same need for youth engagement and better climate change education came out as sort of a consensus at all of those workshops. So we kind of got the message that Alaska coastal communities wanted help getting their youth engaged in community-based efforts, community-based problem solving. So that was sort of the genesis of what we call the Alaska CoastWatch for Action project. This is this was developed by a network of organizations in South Central Alaska who have marine education as part of our mission. And we saw this as an opportunity to bring our skills and resources as educators to catalyze and facilitate youth engagement through the schools with community partners in some of these communities that had expressed this need for help with that. And as these pictures just demonstrate the diversity of students that we have in Alaska. The first picture is in Utqiagvik, but the second is in Anchorage, where more than 100 different languages are spoken in the home. So it's a challenge. It's always a challenge to work across various communities. The other challenge that we have in working with communities is that there are some, we're coming in as outsiders, not only to the community, but also to the school system. And we're one among several kind of outside groups that the school system perceives as trying to influence what is being taught and how and when it's being taught. And we're really competing for what is very precious time, school time. So we know that scientists who are coming with outreach activities or also even citizen science projects, also face this kind of challenge of how to get engaged and engage teachers and students. So we saw our role as building bridges and sustaining those bridges between both the scientists who wanted to work with youth in citizen or community science projects, and also between the community members involved in community resilience and adaptation planning and data collection, often tribal environmental specialists in our communities. And that seemed to be the role we thought we could play as catalyst and facilitator. Now, fortunately, we also needed funding, of course, to do this work, particularly to do some travel. And we were able to use what we call a coastal hazards sort of approach. This is one of the ways Sea Grant characterizes threats and risks to communities and then assist them in addressing and preparing for those risks. We were successful in getting a grant from the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, which has a community capacity building grant program specific to coastal hazards like oil spills. This was an outcome of the Gulf oil spill, all of the funding from fines and settlements. And of course, oil spills are a hazard that's very relevant to the organizations in South Central Alaska, and they're relevant to the Arctic, but we were also able to expand that to some of the different hazards that are really a consequence of climate change. So we first built an educational framework around the coastal hazards. We were focusing on, in terms of science content, to provide both the teachers and the potential community partners with a big picture of how the Arctic environment is changing and what the specific consequences to communities are, or that will present themselves as hazards. Kind of that right-hand column are the hazards, and the kind of left-hand column is more the scientific conceptual knowledge that that we're focusing on for the students, and the K-12 students. If some of this language in this framework looks familiar to you online who are viewing it, this was taken from the key messages in the National Climate Assessment for Alaska region. So we then mapped that framework and the hazard, all the science content to the STEM standards that are known as the Next Generation Science Standards. And I'm not going to belabor this, but for those of you who are educators, you would just need to know that this can be a deal breaker for teachers who need to meet their academic requirements while they're doing fun things like field trips and citizen science projects. I just wanted to share with you, this is my favorite Next Generation Science Standard. It's a middle school standard, which is tailor-made for engaging teachers and students in citizen science type projects. And there are many other standards that focus on, as a practice, a science practice, that students are being asked to engage in and be assessed on in terms of making observations, collecting and analyzing data, and problem solving that are also really relevant to these types of projects. Two other strategies that we're bringing to Arctic communities we're bringing to several Arctic communities. The first are teacher workshops, but ones that involve local scientists, community members who are already involved in community-based monitoring and resilience work. The picture you see on the right is a Bering Strait school district teacher at a gnome workshop getting some training in plankton identification for early detection of harmful algal blooms. And the second thing that we're bringing to different communities is the collaborative development of curriculum units like the ones you see here for the North Borough School District. And these are designed not only to meet the Next Generation Science Standards, but the Inupiaq learning framework, which is the way in which the district is also meeting cultural standards. And so our goal is just kind of making these connections to culture and to citizen science and community-based monitoring efforts in the community in a way that's sustainable by making it part of the curriculum that will be repeated in future years. Finally, we're building out a website that was an outcome of those community resilience workshops that happened in 2016. This is the website is AdaptAlaskaorg, and it was developed as a place where people could share resources and tools for communities in terms of understanding what's changing in the Arctic and how can we adapt to this change, and also to share some success stories. So what we have added on a whole new section, which is for educators, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what that looks like. It is a work in process, but we have populated it somewhat and are working as partners to do that with resources that we think are relevant to the Arctic ecosystems and to those in Arctic communities. And also we would hope to share some success stories soon. So when you go to that page, the first thing you see are these, we've actually organized these educational resources by these different hazards, which is the same way in which the other portion of the website is organized and has more information on all of these issues for communities and for teachers. And so when you click on one of these boxes, it takes you to a landing page, which kind of lines out all of the resources that are in the database and information about them. And it also does it in a way, it's organized by concepts and topics. So this helps teachers build units in a kind of logical sequence as they pick and choose activities, learning activities that are appropriate for their grade level. If you scroll further down that education page, we have a searchable database of which we've added a lot of resources to. You can search that by the Next Generation Science Standard, by the grade level, and by topic and type. And so we tried to summarize how teachers can use this resource, what it is, whether they're interested in then clicking on the link or actually downloading a PDF of the activity or connecting to a video or other types of multimedia resources. And we do have in our types, we've included citizen science as something you can select. So if you were to select all the citizen science projects, you would see a variety of resources that are related to different coastal hazards, and you can also select just those by coastal hazards. So this is, as I mentioned, it's a work in progress, but it's going to be a curated collection of resources that are relevant to the Arctic and Alaska environments. And it will include these citizen science type projects, community science projects like Globe and Signs that are the most accessible and usable by K-12 teachers and students because of the way they are designed with, as Elena explained it, with lesson plans attached for teachers to use. So coming soon too, we're going to be adding these teacher and student success stories. These are just a couple examples where high school students are involved in an erosion monitoring project in Good News Bay. And in Old Harbor, we have a 6th grader who got very interested in the PSP monitoring and actually won 2 science fair awards for the work that she did and is hopefully on her way to considering at least becoming a scientist. So that's my presentation for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excuse. Thank you. So, still solving some of our technical sound issues here. So, Alice's question is, how do you get community volunteers in areas where citizens expect to be paid for their work?
Well, that's actually why we kind of moved into the terminology community-based monitoring, because it was our recognition that much of this work is done by paid people in the tribal organizations, by Sea Grant agents, in collaboration with some volunteers. So we had a lot of conversation about that at that statewide workshop, and they're just, it's all goes back to these outcomes that Elena was talking about, that there are a lot of reasons why people will volunteer to do things and collect data, because there's an incentive, because they care about their local environment, because they're bird watchers who can identify beach birds and want to help out in that way. So it's a lot about motivation, but it's really not as traditional in many Alaska Native communities or rural communities for people to volunteer. And they basically are very busy just subsisting and living their life there in rural communities. So in many of these projects only will exist if there are paid people to coordinate them or collect some of that data.
Thank you. We've just had somebody that could ask you to re-show your URL for your website. And we'll take one more quick question from online. Is there anybody? Oh, there's a question here in the on-site room.
So I think I forgot to show it.
I'm wondering how
.org.
evaluate the learning outcomes related to both cultural standards and to the next generation science standards?
So the question, as I understand it, was how we, is and there's a variety. That's always a challenge, and that's something I've been working with the North Slope Rural School District for several years. And so I work closely with they have a Inupiat education department. Juneau has a Juneau Indian Studies department, and those educators, are the ones that are coming up with performance expectations to demonstrate basically the skills and understandings that they are expecting that are cultural in nature. But the Alaska Cultural Standards actually do lay out some expectations that just need to be adapted locally for the local culture. And there's also been a couple of efforts to line out what would be the criteria to evaluate teachers in terms of being cultural educators, culturally responsive educators. So there are some criteria for that in the standards, and it's just often a matter of adapting it to make sure it's relevant to the local or regional Alaska Native culture.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think we'll now go on to our next speaker, who is Ted Cheeseman. Ted is the co-founder of the Marine Mammal Photo Identification Citizen Science web platform, Happywhale, and one of the 5 founding senior polar expedition guides in the Polar Citizen Science Collective. Ted's background in conservation science and his career leading polar expedition tours set him on a path of finding ways to increase engagement in science among the traveling public, both to improve science and to create a more educated public. Today, we will be talking about creating polar ambassadors through science, through citizen science. Welcome, Ted.
Well, thank you. I assume all can hear me. Hope there's no echo. Thanks for joining from wherever you are. I have the good fortune of working in an industry that I have a background as a scientist, but have spent much of my career in this industry that goes to extremely, extremely remote places. And in the course of several decades there, what became evident to me is this potential synergy, which was not really being realized as it could. And that's that, science is extremely expensive in remote polar regions, and yet these are the areas experiencing the most change of anywhere on the planet. So what we see is a potential, right, to use these platforms of opportunity because we're traveling with travelers who are educated, engaged, out of their element, interested in doing something different. They're well equipped with camera gear and so on. But then they're also on vacation. So there's this potential to use the platform of opportunity as a great way to collect data, to understand these environments. But then at the same point, we're constrained because it's not a science voyage. We can't just say, okay, we're going to follow this latitude line or this bathymetry curve or what have you. So we have to fit the science into the platform as given. So on screen here, you can see a couple examples of where we operate. Certainly coastal Alaska is also a major cruise ship operation, although the particular set of this particular fleet that we mostly work with is only minimally in Alaskan waters. There are some, and there's definitely some operations that have expressed a lot of interest in this. And then down in the Antarctic, quite a strong presence there. Most of these are what we call small expedition tour vessels. There's the whole spectrum, though, from yacht size operations where you can do a little bit more tailored work up to larger cruise ships where you're ever more restricted. So I was going to go very quickly through some of the projects we have going on and then talk some about the particulars of what makes this work, what the opportunities and challenges are. So in brief terms, a few of the projects. One is this cloud observation project set up by NASA, where this is something done anywhere in the world. It's app-based, it's very straightforward, but because we are in these extremely remote regions, there's added value. It's basically taking a ground observation in order to ground truth a satellite image of clouds. So you calculate or the app helps you calculate an overpass schedule when a satellite is going to be passing over. You walk outside, take a photo of the clouds, do an observation, some descriptors of the clouds, and we're getting data from this or for this climate modeling effort and weather modeling effort that wouldn't otherwise be available. Seabird surveys, there's a long history of using birds as indicators of habitat change, ecosystem change. And so what's really fun is engaging participants in it. You have budding seabirders, budding bird watchers aboard these voyages. This is a way to teach them and engage them in a way that's showing them that there's more meaning than just, oh, there's a bird flying by, but hey, there's scientific value to us recording what bird and where, doing surveys like that. One of the newer projects that is really exciting and fun is phytoplankton sampling. That's one particular project, Fjord Fido, we have going on a number of vessels, in particular in the Antarctic, where one boat from the tour basically has either a trained expedition staff aboard or scientists aboard, and they do a plankton trawl. They do some real simple CTD measurements and a couple other environmental variable measurements, basically looking at the change in phytoplankton concentrations due to increased meltwater due to climate change. So it's really neat. People get to handle the equipment themselves and then back aboard, look at plankton in a microscope, as you see in the top left there. That's the lead scientist, Allison, there, standing over the microphone, or standing over the microscope. And then the project that I have been involved in developing myself, is a project called Happywhale, where, and this, I built into this a piece that I think is one of the most important take-home messages, which is that if you want to get people engaged, it's great to make it easy. That gets people to show up. But if you really want engagement for the long term and in depth of engagement, you need to make the project rewarding. Citizen science, I think, it's really great to say, hey, this is meaningful. But if it's not meaningful to them personally, it's not going to get the kind of traction that I think enables a long-term monitoring, enables real depth and quality of data. So that's what we've done with Happywhale, where we're basically using humpback whale tails, using automated image recognition to identify individual whales, building off of databases compiled for decades now by scientists, to match photos contributed by wildlife photographers and passengers on these voyages. We then, when we match the whale, we then tell them, hey, this whale, it's been seen 15 times, it's been seen in the Arctic, it's also been seen on its breeding grounds in the Caribbean, and anytime that whale is seen in the future, we then send them a notification. So it's kind of an ongoing engagement, which I think is really, well, for this project, it's led it to really excellent ongoing participation, where people then take it home and dig out their own old photos, or the next time they go whale watching, they will, they'll think of this, and a connection is made, and opening a door to learning about the science. I threw this in because we're really excited. We just in the last week are deploying really high-end new automated image recognition. So we're basically able to identify any whale. These are two cases. On the top right is a calf, which is usually very difficult to match a calf to an adult, but this new algorithm is doing just that. So it's basically technology supported, but the real key is participation that's rewarding for all those that engage. And the way that we've built this, really, our role has been one as communicators. We worked with a couple different entities There's an Arctic Association of Cruise Operators. There's an Antarctic Association of Cruise Operators, etc., where what we've built is a way to communicate into the ship so that scientists can come to us and we'll help them build a project that will work in this platform. And I think ultimately that's what's most important, is not just, hey, what science can we get from this platform, but how can we make it work in the context of a ship that's got a schedule that's going to the next landing site in 4 hours, that yes, you're in the most remote place that scientists would cost $50,000 a day just to get a ship to, but we also have to pick up and move in 4 hours to the next site, to the next site, to the next site. So if we can fit a project in, we're really excited to, but it has to, only certain projects can work well. And what we've seen is a lot of projects that try to get into this space and just kind of don't get traction. So we've learned how to make that work. And, for those, if there's any, any scientists in the crowd there that among those who are listening who are interested in saying, hey, look, it would be really great to get data from these remote waters that tour vessels do travel in. We offer ourselves essentially as a liaison, as a way to interpret it and also get many more ships involved rather than just one ship at a time or one ship in a season. We're quite excited. We got funding this last fall from Booking.com, Booking Cares Foundation, to build an app as an extension of this, which we see as a way to increase that feedback loop, to make it, a participant can create a login and be fed much more information, just the little tidbits. I mean, funny thing is, from a scientist's point of view, feedback is a peer-reviewed paper. Here you go. Here's the product of it. But that's totally irrelevant to most participants in a citizen science project. They want to hear something that's like Instagrammable, tweetable, something that's fun and in a moment, hey, my whale has been seen again, and something that's really relevant to them. So this app will facilitate feedback, but it will also facilitate quite a bit of, where are you? Who are you? When did this happen? There's a lot of the basics that for many of these projects challenges them. So ultimately, that's what we've been set about building. It's really neat to see year by year participation increase dramatically as a result of effectively. I think the main thing is that we're giving enough feedback so that the participants on board these ships are saying, hey, this is great to do. Their staff are hearing that, the officers are hearing that, therefore ultimately the companies are hearing that and saying, hey, that's providing a good experience for our travelers. Let's make more room for it. Let's get more science aboard. It's people don't think, oh, I want to go to the polar region and do science. They think, I want to go, photograph a bear. I want to go photograph a penguin. But when you get that, when they come home and they say the most valuable part of the experience was being involved in science, then it creates a little bit more of an opening, and ultimately I think it's doing great things for the science. So polarcollective.org is the site, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ted. That was a great presentation. Given our time constraints, I think what we'll do is hold off on questions until after our last speaker. Our last speaker is Michael Poulsen, who's with the Nordic Foundation for Development and Ecology in Copenhagen, Denmark. Michael is a biologist by education and has primarily worked with community-based natural resource management as a researcher and advisor. His main interest is sustainable use and the rights and roles of local people to participate in and benefit from conservation. His entry point has been developing participatory monitoring schemes in the Arctic and in the developing world for improving management of biodiversity and use of natural resources. Michael will be discussing how to engage community-based observing programs in the Arctic. Welcome, Michael.
Yes, thank you. Can you see my slide and me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's fine. So yes, as you say, I'm Michael Poulsen, and I'm a biologist by education. I come from Nordic. It's a a small but long-lived social enterprise where we are interested in finding practical solutions for biodiversity as well as for local people's livelihoods. I've been working much with community-based monitoring in tropical countries, and now I'm enrolled in a EU-funded Interest project. It's a project with a consortium of 40 partners, and it is led by the Nansen Center. So Interest will develop an integrated Arctic observation system by extending, improving, and unifying existing systems. One of the 8 work packages is led by Nordic, and it's called community-based observing programs. I'll come back to that. How do I get to the next slide? How do I change the slide down here? Okay, thanks. Yes, this is to show how community-based approaches may differ from scientist-executed monitoring and contributory citizen science. In the Nordic, we are especially interested in these community-based approaches. Go to the next one. So also community-based approaches should not only copy but complement the scientific monitoring. And I would like to point at focus group discussions as a tool. The use of focus group discussions may be little known to among the researchers with a natural science background, as it is qualitative research methods from the social sciences. Okay, in Interest, we are giving special attention to Disco Bay in Greenland and Svalbard. First here to Disco Bay in Greenland, to Pisuna, with community-based monitoring by fishers and hunters. International conventions and the law in Greenland ask for user knowledge to be part of the basis for natural resource management decisions. But this is not really happening systematically. So now for the last 10 years, we have gained experience from this Pisuna program trying to change this. So Pisuna takes a bottom-up approach. We are looking for management decisions at the lower meaningful level, and that's not really the common way in Greenland. That is an old Danish colony where everything is top-down. So this is the core of Pisuna, the summer reform that each community involved in Pisuna will fill out every 3 months. During the 10 years we have had with Pisuna, we have had to make it more and more simple, trying not to be heavy on counting and measuring. So what we really are focusing on is the perceived status and trends and the perceived reasons behind the trends, and what recommendations the local communities have for better management. So when first communities are getting involved in the monitoring, they will often ask for larger quotas, longer seasons, but not always. And here's an example of the opposite. It's about the muskox hunting in the Lersletten, where the local communities have asked for the hunting to be stopped until the management is better controlled. So this graph is to show you that community-based monitoring is gathering data all around the year, and that is not common in the Arctic region. So the fishers from Akunak in Disco Bay were arguing that they had a lot of Arctic cod, Atlantic cod, and they were doubted, but they were able to take this photograph to show that they actually had a lot of cod. And the Atlantic cod is one of the very important resources for along the west coast of Greenland that the local communities want to monitor and to come with a recommendation for the management of this species. With the climate change, it's spreading and increasing very fast, and the local communities are interested in having management that are able to change accordingly. So last year, one of the Pisuna communities, AdaptAlaskaorg, was awarded the Nordic Environmental Prize, and the Prime Minister of Norway is handing over the prize here. And so we hope that that will help to get Pisuna more accepted and spreading all over Greenland. Getting down to there. So this is just the website of Pisuna, which you might go and look more at. And this is the database. Every record is entered into this database, and you can search for the different records afterwards. And of course, there are 3 different pages shown here. The first one where you enter what you search for, and then you get every single observation, and then you get all the notes that are the comments about the trends and the reason behind the trends and the recommendations here on the third page. Yeah, computers are good at handling large data sets, which make it much easier to get all this community-based monitoring data into databases. I hope there will be more of these. And yeah, so some more links to important websites around Pisuna and this. And then, yeah, Chet have already talked about cruise expedition monitoring. In Svalbard, the other focus area here for our work, there are no local communities doing hunting and fishing, but there are a lot of cruise expeditions that could help with the monitoring. And of course, we are also looking at monitoring for better management of those cultural sites and natural resources. This is showing the situation as I see it today. Different cruise operators sailing around now and then, connecting to different kind of citizen science programs. And I dream of having somebody like the Polar Citizen Science Collective in the middle of this figure, like being helping the communication both ways. It's important that there are good feedback to the cruise operators to make sure that these things are not dying out. The different parties, of course, somebody should help funding this, because it cannot just be sustained on a volunteer basis. So some of the conclusions from the workshop, that it's already undertaken and there's an unexplored potential, and it can be focused on geophysical, biological, environmental, cultural, and the feedback I just talked about, and it can build trust between scientists and people, and there was a broad interest for further cooperation, and also a pilot program 2019 where we might test some of these initiatives and evaluate them afterwards. And a little more broadly, what we have learned for looking at all these community-based monitoring programs, it is that this participatory monitoring or community-based monitoring programs, they are often operating at local level and have a fast response. The management decisions are taken soon after data have been collected, and it's a little a contrast to normal citizen and scientific monitoring. It takes longer, and it is on a larger geographical area. So some of my last comments, all my last comments will be that community-based monitoring should be also helping decision-making, and it should give a voice to the users or the people involved, and it should raise environmental awareness among the people involved. And that is my presentation. Thank you. Anybody can hear me?
Questions online, and not very much time. So I'm going to read a couple, but then I'm going to let everyone know that I'll share the questions, or we'll share the questions with the presenters and invite them to respond to people via email. If you could send us your email questions. Let's see. So I think one of the last questions that we had was, is local knowledge is mainly oral. This is from Petra Bentley. How do you deal with databasing it? And as a follow-up to that, Audrey asks whether recognition of the consumer project via the environmental award has increased interest in using citizen science, community-based monitoring data in decision-making and policy framework. Let me leave it at that one question in the post. Did you see that question, Michael? Okay, maybe. Yeah.
I've not seen it. Is it in the chat or where?
Right, it would be in the chat. So the question, let's focus on local knowledge is mainly oral. How do you deal with databasing it? How do you deal with putting it into a database?
Yeah. Sorry, I cannot hear what you're saying.
Okay. Elena, would you be able to answer that?
There are organizations now that actually have a database. Here in LOCA, it's ecological local knowledge. I mean, in the United States, there is that program. And also the LEO program actually has a database for local community observations that they then connect them with scientists to find out maybe an explanation for the observation, the unusual observation that is happening. And so there are, and also there's archived interviews of elders. So they may be oral, but there are records.
Thank you very much. And since it's 9 o'clock here in Fairbanks, Alaska, we'll close down. We would like again to thank the International Arctic Science Committee for co-hosting today's seminar, the University of Alaska Fairbanks and the International Arctic Research Center for providing our venue for today's in-person seminar, and the National Science Foundation Office of Global Programs for their financial support. If you're online, we would appreciate your feedback to the seminar and suggestions for future topics. Please take the short 1 to 2 minute seminar evaluation survey, and we have the link both in the chats box and also, I believe, on the slide. So I think that's it. Thank you to all of our speakers, and we'll close today. Thank you.